Let's see, who are we missing here?
No one.
No one. Nope, everybody's here. All right, I would call the March 25th, 2021 meeting of the Measure Z Advisory Committee to order at 2:02. If you could join me in a salute of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Does any committee member wish to make a modification to the agenda?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Scott, go ahead. I think you're muted, Scott.
I kind of lost track. On the published agenda, the date that is set for the meeting is Thursday, March 26th. And so I have questions as to whether that meets the compliance standards for the Brown Act.
Okay. Mr. Quincy, do you have an opinion on that matter?
Yeah, no, and I saw your email a little bit earlier today, Scott, and thank you for that. We can't modify that right now. I'm not worried about it, however, because the bylaws state that we'll meet on Thursdays. There's several other places on, on the county website, the notices that we've given that say that it'll take place on Thursdays. So yeah, it says the 26th instead of the 25th, but all of our noticing has said Thursday, the 25th.
Okay. Are you
Okay, well, that will allay my concern then. I'm just trying to dot the i's and cross the t's is all. Thanks.
Certainly, thank you. Just by way of information, Ginger was kind enough to advise me today that the Board of Supervisors appointed Tammy Trent from Fortuna to the alternate position. Mr. Quincy has indicated that he had a conversation with her, and although her appointment is effective, she was going to be unable to join us today. So presumably she'll join us at the next meeting. So we have now a full committee and we'll be able to operate on that basis. This would be the time for any public comment on matters not on the agenda. So do any members of the public have a desire to speak to the committee regarding any matter not on the current agenda?
I don't see members of the public, but I see Ginger raising her hand.
Can I speak?
Go ahead, Ginger.
Okay, so I just wanted to, my phone was ringing, I had to jump up. I just wanted to, as far as Tammy goes, I just want to tell all the members that may not know, but she lives in Fortuna and I think is the mayor, is she, Sheriff? Or she was?
I think Sue Long is the mayor, isn't she still?
Oh, well, anyway, but
Ms.
she's,
Trent ran for city council, I know.
yeah, and she's been there for, she has never, ever missed one Measure Z meeting in all of these years. She came to all the meetings. She's been on our Zoom except for the very first meeting because she said she didn't know that the public could attend. So I think she's going to be a good member. And I just wanted to let you guys know that she's very dedicated. That's all.
Okay. Any members of the public wishing to make comment, Mr. Quincy?
I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Okay. Moving on then, next item would be approval of the action summary for the March 18th meeting. Is there any desire for corrections or additions to the action summary as presented? Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the action summary as presented by staff.
I'll make a motion to approve the action summary as presented.
Okay, a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? Any public comment on the action summary?
Not seeing any, Chair.
Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand in your frame. Opposed? Okay, the action summary then is approved. Next would be any county administrative office updates.
Yeah, Chair. So we are, as you know, as we talked about last week, we're in the middle of the budget development process. We're really crunching a lot of numbers here, and we have revised estimates for Measure Z expenditures. And I'll go ahead and share my screen with you now. It's good news for the committee. When we started the process this year, we had my original estimates had us at 8,076,000, and that's been revised after calculating some of our cost allocation costs and internal service fund costs down to 8.002 million. So now the committee has $4.513 million to recommend for expenditure. So it's about $70,000 to the good for this committee to recommend. So that would put your recommendation still right about here. So you'd be able to fund or recommend for funding all these programs up until the APS program, which would be partially funded. But from there, that's the only update that I have for you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Bronco?
Yes. During the process, many of the applicants had gone ahead, sharpened their pencils up, and did ask for reductions in their programs to go ahead and fund. It doesn't appear that we have enough funding right now to add a brand new project, but I'm wondering if the committee should look at restoring funding to the already recommended list to restore their funding as much as possible for those that did voluntarily reduce their requested amounts.
Okay. Tell me, since we're talking about $70,000 in round numbers, just explain to me a little bit conceptually how you would suggest that we would approach that task, because the reductions, if I recall, were significantly more than that. Are you suggesting some sort of pro rata split of the 70, or allocation of all of the 70 to one that reduced more than 70, or how do you envision this happening?
I haven't quite worked that part out, but I'm open to any particular suggestion as a way to take whatever applications are and try to make them as whole as possible. It could be that we just start at the top of the list, and the highest ranking project that voluntarily took a deduction would then get that additional amount allocated to make their project whole. It could be as simple as that. And that if there's any left over after making it whole, it would go to the next project down.
I see. Okay. Thoughts of the committee? Mr. Cole?
I like the intention on this as part of this discussion, and kind of connects to kind of some of the concerns that I have that we'll, I'm guessing, discuss later. But I think on this one, the only way I think as a committee that we could return funding would be based on the priorities that we have defined. So like we'd have to start highest priority projects and returning funding or return funding to those. But I do think it's going to be a little hard. I think we're going to have to get a very clear idea of how this committee wants to define the cutoff point for what projects we recommend for funding. So I think we absolutely have to, as a committee, decide where that floor was before we started saying we want to return funding to other applications.
Okay. Any other committee members have an opinion? Okay. I've heard two opinions. To my perception, there is no motion that would anticipate activity. Ernie?
Well, we made a list of our recommendations, and if any, there may be other additional funding coming up, and we could just keep on moving down the list. I'm thinking to go back and try to prorate something and then cut somebody out that was already on our list would be a mistake. But it would be just too confusing to prorate back, and I think we ought to just stick on the list that we're on. That's all.
Okay. Mr. Robertson?
Yeah, Ernie's comment does force a comment from me. The board kind of deals with this every year when there are excess revenues and they allocate it per our prioritization. We've already asked those who can to make adjustments that fund their program. So I would prefer not to go back and then try to reallocate. We would just go down the list. So right now that puts 100,000 for the EVOS program. If there's more, then that'll be funded and it'll go down from there. I think that's a more equitable way to do it because those who can make adjustments have done so, and those who apparently cannot have not done that. And that puts the onus on the board into the next year as well, where we will have no input beside public comment.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts?
Chair Zemer.
Mr. Hansel?
Thank you. I agree with Chief Robertson and Ernie. It's this is what we deal with every year with the board. We create our priorities, and then we're going to see adjusted revenues as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year as well. And so, you know, there's going to be some more money to allocate and more money to allocate probably in the first quarter if the books close on time this next year. So I would just recommend that we just do what we've always done. We created our priorities and we want to fund the projects that we can currently fund under our priorities, and then kick this to the board and they can allocate the money as it comes in and the projects as we prioritized.
Okay. I'm not seeing any actual motion to enable the committee to take any specific action. So lacking a motion, my assumption would be that we would go forward with the process with a prioritization as we've already identified it, and let the flexibility, if you will, be dealt with in the normal manner. Hopefully we'll have more input this year in the excess allocation, if you want to call it that, when it comes time for the Board of Supervisors. I know I'm going to make it a point to try to communicate with them at that point in time, and we will go forward with that process. All right. I had asked the CEO's office to provide us with a summary document that we used to receive a number of years ago, which was kind of a breakdown of the allocations that are ongoing to the sheriff's office, the district attorney's office, public defender's office, and just to kind of refresh the committee about where we're at and how many positions are being allocated. Mr. Quincy had some time pressures and wasn't able to include that in written format to us, but he's indicated to me that he's capable of doing that now.
Yeah, Chair. So what you see on the screen now is what I was able to put together. This is kind of a running total, and I apologize for the numbers. There's so many numbers, but we're mostly looking over in these two columns right now. So right now, the ongoing costs related to county staff, we have 68 employees. For the current year, it's about almost $6.9 million just in staff costs. In 21-22, there's going to be, again, 68 employees and about $7.2 million just in staff costs. Next year, that represents about 58% of the total projected Measure Z revenue. And I can break down exactly which kind of staff make up those 68 if you would like as well.
For my purposes, this suffices. Just help me understand the 7205 is including all roll-ups and all employee costs, or just salary based?
Just salary based.
Okay, so the difference between that and the 8.002 that you were talking about either earlier is the roll-up cost, basically the benefits and so on.
No, that's the services and supplies cost, and we have other internal service fund costs as well.
Okay.
So it doesn't, This 7.2 million includes benefits, it includes PERS, retirement, dental insurance, those types of things.
So there's roughly $800,000 in services and supplies that are not detailed here.
Services and supplies and internal service fund costs, things like IT charges, purchasing charges, things like that.
Okay, so the county is essentially billing back $800,000 of operational cost to the Measure Z fund.
Not exactly $800,000 because there is a services and supplies piece. So the services and supplies, those are computers for the employees, anything like that that the department thinks is necessary. But there are internal service fund costs. And let me see if I can pull that up for you, Chair.
And just let me help out with that. It's motor pool is also, we have our Trinity River Division Station rent that's also on that.
So these are largely operational and overhead costs, not
Correct.
directly related to personnel employment.
That's correct.
Okay. Any
Can you
questions, Ernie? Ernie, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Can we get a copy of that somehow, email, or how would we
Sure.
do that? Thank
Yep.
you. Can you send the committee a copy of that? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion of that particular element? Any public comment?
Not seeing any, Chair.
Okay. Moving on then would be, the next item would be the focus of today's discussion as initiated largely by Mr. Cole. My understanding is that Nicholas, you wanted to kind of have a procedural discussion and a outlook on financial outlook and kind of a planning discussion as far as future activities and stuff. So without me mischaracterizing your intent anymore, why don't you go ahead and indicate your interest and kind of initiate the discussion.
Thank you, Chair. And my direction of the conversation has kind of evolved with my experience on the committee. And early on, I was very concerned about, maintaining the functionality of the fund for the municipalities and for the applicants. And now I've kind of gotten to a point where I'm concerned about making sure that we are having the ability to fund the intention of the ordinance. And where that falls specifically for me is to ensure that this committee is able to properly fund Humboldt Bay Fire. What I'm seeing is every year Humboldt Bay Fire has taken a voluntary hit on their application. And I really
Could I stop you for just a second, Nicholas?
Yeah.
Humboldt Bay Fire is a specific entity which Mr. Robertson represents. And to my knowledge, the Humboldt Bay Fire as an entity has never requested any funding. It's the Humboldt County Fire Chiefs Association. So just for nomenclature purposes, do we accept that difference?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm still learning the differences between organizations and associations. And I'm more speaking to the application for the funding for fire protection and fire response.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how, as a committee, we get them a way to be fully funded for their applications in the same context that the ongoing county positions have not had to face these same sort of cuts. And I don't feel that the county is overstaffed. I'm not begrudging them those funds, but I'm wanting to make sure that we're properly funding that application and the Fire Chiefs Association so that this ordinance is used in the best way of its intention.
Okay.
That's one of the things I have concerned. I wanted to be able to even talk about, because we have to be in this meeting to be able to discuss anything regarding this. The other one I wanted to kind of touch on was I'd like there to be an annual meeting where we can discuss priorities across the county and just be able to have discussion regarding the impact of Measure Z in different communities, what the needs are in other communities, so that we can get a broader view than just our own area. And again, because of the need to meet in this forum, we can't do that in another way. And so there's been no mechanism to communicate about what's happening in our own communities.
Okay. Thoughts of the committee members? Mr. Hansel, is that a indication to enter the discussion?
Well, sure, why not? I appreciate the discussion. I agree with Nick wholeheartedly that the spirit and the intent behind Measure Z was to definitely fund some public safety programs, police, fire, and roads. You know, that was really the priority, you know, that got this off the ground. And I believe that is what the voters' intention was, to make sure that those countywide programs were funded through this tax measure. So I completely agree with you, and fire has benefited tremendously. Before Measure Z, there wasn't a mechanism for a lot of these volunteer fire departments to, you know, get quality PPE unless they raised the money themselves or they applied for a grant themselves. And so this is a steady stream and a plan, and they've had an outstanding plan over the last 5-6 years of making sure that it's the PPE and fire apparatus and other odds and ends, including buildings, were distributed throughout the county and to the necessary fire departments. And so I applaud the fire departments for doing everything possible, and the Fire Chiefs Associations have done an outstanding job. So, you know, I've always been, you know, the volunteer fire departments have done well, and you know, one of the things that you know, I always wanted to see was Humboldt Bay Fire as well as Fortuna and Arcata. Even though they do have funding mechanisms, they don't necessarily, you know, directly benefit a lot from Measure Z, and so, you know, to making sure that they also benefit from Measure Z in the future, I think is definitely important, because it is definitely something that we've seen over the last couple of years, how all the fire departments essentially work together within our county to respond to many of the fire emergencies. And so it's very important that we support all of them, including the municipalities. So one of the other things, you know, that the sustainability of all the funds over the years, I agree that that's something that definitely we should look at. The one thing that I think many of us do, and I think Ginger's a good example of this, is that she reaches out to different parts of the community to ask how things are going with Measure Z. And any one of our members can do that at any time. Talk to Oric, talk to Orleans, talk to Garberville, and talk to the different chambers, and talk to the community in general, and see how Measure Z money is spent, as well as reaching out to the volunteer fire departments, the police departments, and doing your own research. Yes, we can't go as a group and meet with them without, I guess, calling to order and having a full-on meeting. But, you know, a couple of us can go and go as a team out to some of these things. So that is something that definitely we could set up this next year. And, you know, so field trip, so to speak, so you can, so we can identify with what's happening out there. One of the things that I like what the CAO has done in the past, when there has been a major announcement for Measure Z funding, whether it's an apparatus or there's something that has been purchased by Measure Z, there's been an open house or something like that. You know, the Trinity River Division, when we opened our station, an invitation was sent out to all the Measure Z committee members so they can come down or over to Willow Creek and see the new station. And so that was a benefit to see how the Measure Z funds are being worked. And so I think it is beneficial for the CAO to continue to do that, and to let this committee know about the good things that are happening. If there's a road that's paved, if there's a stoplight that's put in, that, you know, we all would love to be there to celebrate in that. And so, so maybe that's something that we can make sure happens in the future.
Other thoughts or comments? Sean?
I think the county fire chiefs and departments would greatly appreciate the sentiments and concerns that have just been expressed. I don't think I could be more eloquent as their representative. So thank you for that. We're certainly aware of trying to meet all the department's needs balanced with all of the applications, because like all of you experienced, it's very challenging to turn down a lot of them, and that's what we do. So we're definitely looking at other ways to be more efficient and effective. So there's that. As far as what Nicholas said, I think a solution to that concern with updates is maybe in our September meeting, or even our first meeting in the new year, we could have an update either through the CAO's office or just inviting all of the applicants to present the success or benefits that Measure Z has provided to them. They're already required to provide such a report, but I think it would be a great way to just have those faces provide that information for us so we know what it's doing and how it's meeting the needs.
Ernie, go ahead. You need to unmute, Ernie.
I'd probably do better muted, but anyway, I just wanted to say that if you go over the fire department's budget and know what it's being spent on, I think you'll find that it's the best dollar the county spends. A lot of the labor and fire departments is volunteer. And if you look at the budget they're asking for, it's all equipment and durable goods, and it's going to be here not only today, but tomorrow. And I don't think you can waste $1 on a fire department. But on the other hand, we can't write them an open budget either. So, they're going to have to be reasonable in what they request. And I agree that they ought to be well-funded, and they do have needs. And I have to say, after having been personally involved in fire departments for a while, this Measure Z funding has been an incredible improvement. I mean, it's funded fire departments out in the hills where we need them. And, it's a great thing for the fire departments, Measure Z, but we can't write them an open-ended budget, but I really believe that we should be real generous in fire departments because of the bang for the buck that we get with them. Yeah, that's all.
Nicholas?
I'm wondering, as a committee, when we ask for voluntary reductions in applications, can we choose not to accept a reduction in application?
It would seem a little disingenuous to me to ask for the reduction and then in a specific case of a specific applicant decline it. Obviously at some point we are showing quote unquote favoritism in our ranking process, but as chair, I'd be a little uncomfortable with asking for voluntary reductions and then having us in a situation where we would say, oh no, that particular applicant is highly valued to us and we would encourage you, to withdraw your reduction. It seems like that procedurally and the optics of that are uncomfortable to me as an individual member and as a chair. Sheriff Hansel?
Yeah, I do want to add on that discussion point too, is that it's been in the past when I haven't been too fond about some funding measure or some funding mechanism within an application, and the applicant removed that portion when they were asked to, propose reductions. And then for me, that move made that application more appealing, which I gave them a higher number. And so, it does influence decisions when someone does necessarily, reduce their application, and it has for me in the past. So, I guess it's up to the committee. I guess the committee can say, no, we want to fully fund you, but it also influences our decision as well too, the other way. So.
Ginger?
So I just wanted to say that to jump on the sheriff's comment that I go out into the community. I do neighborhood watch, so I'm everywhere. I'm up on Island Mountain. I'm up to Oric. I'm all over the place. But every single time I go out to a new community, they know that I'm also on Measure Z, and they will take me to their fire department, or they will take me to wherever they've been given funding. Like Kimball, they have a great big sign on front of their facility, and it says, "Thank you, Measure Z." And so they'll take me to their fire trucks, and we used to hand out the bumper stickers. I don't know if we still do, but all the new equipment, any of the equipment says, thank you, Measure Z, and in the parades and stuff. So people are very grateful. And I think that they know deep in their hearts that they have to share this money with everybody else. And as far as, telling people, well, we don't want you to reduce your funding, I get that, but we represent everybody in this community. We're not just here to represent one piece of the community. And if we start doing it for one, then it's all for one for all, then it sets up sort of a precedent, which is why I probably made a few enemies in the fire department when I said, we can't just give you an amount and then you tell us how you spent it later, because that never would fly with anybody else, even though we trust them 100%. So just know that if you're not out in the community, feel free to go. If you want to go with me, call me and I'll take you wherever you want to go to see all the wonderful things that Measure Z is doing. And we do encourage people to put up little signs, sometimes in road work. They'll, in a certain community, they'll have a little sign up and it says, funded by Measure Z. And just as a follow-up to that, we did turn Lolita down. They were number 3. And but I've already been in touch with the woman that put in the application. I've spent 3 or 4 hours with her, the sheriff. I don't know how long you were on the phone with her, but we have things going there. I mean, what they needed, they're getting. And I don't mind helping people do that. And all of you are welcome to do that. If you have a passion for something, and you can always volunteer as a volunteer. You don't have to volunteer as a Measure Z person, but we've got some really good things going already. And all of my materials for Neighborhood Watch are in Spanish. So we're going to set up a whole section in Lolita for the Spanish speaking community down there. And we have abandoned cars and illegal dumping. And Bob, you're going to be hearing from them because I told them about your success on Scenic Drive. And so, it's all one big community, and we need to, jump out there if you have any time at all to help some of these agencies that have applied and maybe they didn't get their money, but they need help. And I like doing it. I've always done it. I even help them if they say, well, what was wrong with our application? What could we have done differently? I'm happy to share that with them. And I did that with that group that came. The young man came back on. He said, I'm not angry with you guys. This is a good learning situation for me. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry, but it was something to do with disaster preparedness. And I'm helping them. I mean, I totally got them on track for maybe they'll apply next year. They're a very good agency, but you didn't know it from their application. And we can't dig into those individually. So anyway, I just want you to know good things are happening from all of this, and we can help people that aren't qualified.
Okay, I see Ernie and Bob. Let me just ask for a quick pause. I have a question for Mr. Robertson that I think might bear on this whole discussion. When we started initially, the committee was talking to applicants, specifically the Fire Chiefs Association, because they were the best example. And in the initial years, we actually even funded some money that was used. And I think Sibel Emmett was in charge of a process where she was trying to do an organizational effort with the smaller fire agencies to see if there was any consolidation capabilities or bringing those entities into a situation where they actually formed a legal district and so on. Maybe the committee members can help my memory, because I can't recall. I don't recall seeing that element in this year's fire chiefs application. Do you remember if it was there, Sean? And if so, why not? Or has that effort largely been played out, and the county's position is that it's unlikely that these kind of efforts would be successful? Or where does that whole process stand,
I do. It was in the budget. It's specifically under planning as a line item. We've done a lot of work, especially in the last 2 years, with an ad hoc fire services committee. It was with Mike Wilson. And that led to the annexation down in Riodale and Scotia to form a new district. That's playing into CSA 4 up north, Arcata, even Humboldt Fire District number 1, which is part of Humboldt Bay Fire. So it's definitely a model for the future to help support a lot of the volunteer agencies and maximize the service delivery. Because like you're saying, Measure Z's become incredibly important in making sure they have the basic things they need. So that work will continue. COVID definitely put a bit of a dent in the impetus and momentum we had, which is also why we didn't have an annual report that Justin Robbins was asking about. But that will be being initiated again.
Okay, thank you. Ernie, I think you were next.
Yeah, while we're on publicity for Measure Z, I've had several of the people that have received funding from Measure Z wanting to know where they could get bumper stickers, signage, or anything, and I had to tell them I didn't know. Where would they get like a bumper sticker for their vehicles that said funded by Measure Z, or yard signs or any of that kind of stuff? Is that something that they have to provide themselves, or do we have some avenue for publicizing Measure Z? Does anybody know?
Ginger, I think Ginger was involved with this previously. Can you speak to that, Ginger?
Well, they had them at the CAO's office the first few years. I think you guys handed them out, Sean. You may have a box of them somewhere, but I have a few at my house because when I go out, I always take them, and sometimes they don't want to put it on their stuff. And so I'll say, oh no, you got to put it on, and I'll go, I help myself to their bumpers. I say, this has got to go on here. And they go, well, I go, no, it's really, you have to do that. And so do you guys have those, Sean, still?
So we had a stockpile of them for a couple years, and then it's just a matter of identifying a specific place within the Measure Z budget and allocations to pay for that thing, to pay for those things, because
Oh, I think, there's $70,000 floating around right here as we speak, Maybe you could use a little of that.
Mr. Bronco, I think you were next.
Find the unmute button. One of the things I'd like to weave into the conversation as a idea for consideration is, as we move forward, should the committee look at creating categories under which applicants can go ahead and apply for funding, meaning that there might be a law enforcement category, a fire category, a roads category, that would all receive some percentage of the available Measure Z funds. And then within that, applicants can then go ahead and submit their requests. And then that way applicants, instead of fire competing against sheriff and roads competing against fire, you're getting a competition amongst categories of applicants versus this complete dog eat dog sort of competition for figuring out which projects are on top.
So under your concept then, would say, just for the sake of discussion, make the numbers easy, we had $10 million. We would say 6 million is law enforcement, 3 million is fire, 2 million is EMS. And are you saying to pre-designate portions of the fund? Is that what you're suggesting?
Essentially, you would divvy up whatever total amount by whatever number of categories you have. It doesn't have to be an equal distribution. It could be varied depending upon what the needs most likely are. And that could provide a more balanced approach for the different sorts of projects that fall within those categories, and would certainly make all the projects, say within fire, that much more competitive, or those projects within the law enforcement category that much more competitive amongst each other. We'd still go through the same ranking for them, and they'd be ranked within that category. So what I would essentially see happening if something like this were implemented, we would essentially have 5 lists, if you will. Let's say we had 5 categories, we'd have 5 lists that we're recommending to the board for funding. Here's the list of stuff for fire. Here's a list of stuff for roads. Here's a list of stuff for EMS. Here's a list of stuff for sheriff.
I understand your concept. I guess my question is, you would still have you describe it as dog on dog or dog eat dog. When you allocated the gross amount into the various categories, you'd essentially be doing the same thing there. And then just within the categories, there would again be so wouldn't you actually, to use your phrase, wouldn't you have two rounds of dog eat dog then rather than one?
I guess perhaps that is a potential as far as figuring out that initial percentage, what percentage should be allocated to fire versus which percentage should be allocated to law enforcement. There's still that issue of trying to figure out what that would be.
I'll say just as a relatively, I guess, as long as anybody's been on the committee since I was here, since it began, my particular view is that I've just, as opposed to trying to categorize it into the fire and law enforcement and so on, I've taken a little different direction in my own voting pattern, and that is I'm trying to provide just kind of a floor level of basic functionality for everyone in the county. Hence my support for the fire proposals and the ambulance companies and so on, because I would like to see everybody in the county have a basic level of emergency medical support. I'd like to see everybody have a basic level of fire support. I'd like to see them have a basic level of police support or law enforcement. And after that floor is achieved, then I feel like I have the luxury of going and considering other applications and I'll call them enhancements, maybe just as a characterization against kind of floor level provision of service. I feel like that served me pretty well. And if somebody asks me, why did you make the choices you make? I can look them straight in the eye and say, I want everybody in this county to have basic level services available to them before I provide enhancements to one community or the other. Maybe some sort of committee perspective on kind of general philosophy about how we would approach this might be as helpful as a specific plan. Ernie?
Yeah, I, with respect to Bob, I think the way we do it is probably the most practical application of allotting the funds. To say that you're going to give a certain amount of funding to a group that maybe at the point doesn't need it as bad as some other area. Like last year, we had terrible fires. They could have probably used more funding than some of the other groups. I think that the way we fund things, we realize the importance, like Glenn says, he sorts out that he wants a basic level. I think we all apply that standard. And like I said numerous times, I don't see an application that we get that isn't worth funding. But it's our job to sort it out. And if police needs more funding than fire, or ambulance needs funding because I think we just need to keep going the way we're doing. It's everything gets sorted out reasonably. And like Glenn says, I think we keep the priorities in mind as we go.
Scott?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that Ernie summed that up very well. I think that we should keep doing what we're doing and rank each application on its own merits. Not only would that provide that basic level of service that you spoke of, at least in the way that I'm voting, it would also eliminate another layer of financial things that we have to think about and work through.
Okay. Nicholas, just go ahead. You're next. I want to try to keep the discussion somewhat focused and so on. So I guess my first question is, are we going in a direction that's responsive to your concerns, or are we going afield?
No, I think this is absolutely within the intent that I had, because we're able to talk about one, our philosophies about how we prioritize things and what the intention of the ordinance is and what it is to us, and really reinforcing how we got to this process in the first place. What I wanted to bring up was we've been very lucky as a committee that we've had a decent pool of funds to disperse. And we've been able to create a list that we've been able to fund, through those basic services and then to some enhancement services. I think one concern I want to really address is we were shown projections that put the potential funding of this committee, I feel, below that standard level of services. based on increased costs from the existing county obligations and the potential change in economic income. Now, that can be true or not. We can continue to get enough funding to work down this list, but I would really like us to discuss what happens, and is there a mechanism that we can discuss that protects some funding for these basic level services if we have a shortfall of income, or if those expenses get too high to prevent this community to dispense funds. That's the thing I want to dig into, and I don't expect a solution here in this meeting, but I want us to talk about it.
Okay, Mr. Robertson.
I have a thought on that. Like you, Chair Zimmer, I have a prioritization matrix that I use to make decisions, one of which is if something's been funded before, it's obviously very necessary. And so for me, it's a higher prioritization. In this year, I saw, I think, 2 items that had been funded for at least 5 years that some members did not think was as high as a priority. So I would say to Nicholas, there's your mechanism right there. If we have a shortfall and we have to prioritize, then that's one way to make that adjustment. The obvious issue is how does that very vital thing still be funded? But that would be a discussion point, obviously. After that, we've talked about the minimum contribution, and that just gets more complicated.
Ginger, I think you were next.
Well, I just wanted to say, as far as, deciding which agencies are more effective than others for the general population, I would encourage everybody, if you're not already doing it, to look at the quarterly reports that the CAO's office receives and posts online from each of the agencies, because they have to turn in reports and say how their money's being spent. And I think it's sometimes that really helps me to focus on, like, if I'm feeling like, I don't know if they're really doing what we had in mind. And I love reading the reports because they're very good about explaining where the money went and how it's being spent. And, like, beyond the county obligations that we have for Measure Z, which was, boots on the street. If we had categories, Bob, I was thinking when you were talking, there's probably in the ballot measure, there's probably like 10 or more. I wish I had it in front of me, but there's like a whole bunch of categories that were mentioned that could be served. And I think that, oh, thank you. There could be a category for children's mental health, victims of child abuse, emergency communications. We'd have a lot of categories. And so I agree with the other members that I think we're doing a good job, but I always like to have that in front of me when we're making decisions, that we did say, that we would consider these positions or these agencies that provide this service. But I really would like you guys to read the quarterly reports, because I just think that's so helpful by the time we get around to our March Madness, so they say, in making decisions. That's all. Thanks, Sean.
Sure.
Bob?
One thing I'd like to chime in at, as each year goes on, the amount of funding that we have becomes less and less and less. So we are faced with tough decisions of figuring out who gets recommended for allocation and who doesn't. And as time goes on, that's just going to continue to happen. And it's not necessarily our responsibility to figure out what sort of replacement funding needs to be there for agencies or for projects that didn't quite make the cut for the limited amount of funding that was available for allocation. And that I think just staying true to what our mission is, we were identified a given dollar amount that's available for allocation. We've ranked these projects based upon the criteria that the committee has established that seems to work fairly well for distributing them, and we get a ranking of 1 through 10 on them, and they're funded based upon how much funds there are to go down the line until you run out of money. So on the surface, the program's working well. The difficult part is for the agencies that truly do have needs that aren't able to be funded through the program. And that's unfortunately something we can't solve. We were just simply tasked with, who do we recommend these allocations to be made to? And I think the committee's very successful at doing that.
Okay. Mr. Quincy, I'd be interested in your thoughts. You listened to the discussion. Does the CA's office have any perspective on any of the items that have been discussed by committee members?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this conversation has taken, several forms over the years since Measure Z was first passed and Measure O was renewed. And even the priorities for funding changed, as you saw in the Measure O ballot language was slightly different than Measure Z. One thing that I want to make sure that the committee keeps in mind, I don't think I need to remind you guys, is that this is a general tax. And while the ballot language stated a lot of different things, priorities that the community identified as things that are important for public safety, the more that we go down the road of looking to carve out specific amounts for specific categories of things, the more we infringe on this becoming a special tax. And that had a different threshold. This was not placed on the ballot as a special tax. It was placed as a general tax. And so that's important to keep in mind, so that it can address general priorities that change year to year. So I'm more than I think that I'm more than welcome to continue the conversation, and I like what Nick was saying about setting up an annual meeting to talk about our priorities. And I think, Sheriff, what you mentioned about coming in September and having the applicants come and talk about all the good things that they've done over the past year, I think those are great things, and they can help inform what this committee's priorities are coming into the upcoming year. I think that could be a good way to go about it, but carving out certain percentages or making guarantees, especially to outside agencies, I really worry about that turning this into a special tax.
Just for information for the committee, we've discussed this briefly, but I think I would like to reiterate that two of the supervisors, Supervisor Wilson, Supervisor Madrone, are very interested in developing, I'll call it a subcategory of small grants or feeder grants or whatever you want to call them. I've been approached on a number of occasions, and as you may recall, we actually brought this matter to the committee about a year ago. And unfortunately, it was a tough economic time, so it didn't get much traction and so on. My sense in talking to Supervisors Wilson and Madrone is that they are actively working on trying to find a third vote. And I wouldn't be surprised in the next year to see some sort of run taken at trying to have the board give some direction to the committee or create some sort of subcategory of that nature. So just for information purposes, you might want to keep in your mind that there is at this point, a minority viewpoint, but it could become a majority viewpoint that there'd be a small grant or sub-grant process that would have been incorporated into Measure Z if they can find the political, third vote, basically. Is this, Nicholas, are there aspects of this that you don't feel like have been addressed, or?
No, I feel it's been very addressed and it's been very discussed, and that, again, that was my goal. I didn't expect to change anybody's mind or find a consensus. I wanted to see where people were at, and how to continue the conversation, rather than just kind of plugging along on my own. I would love to be able to continue to talk about the priorities of this as we continue to see what the money looks like. But again, my biggest concern is how we ensure services, that baseline of service if there's not a minimum threshold of income? And how do we balance that with the existing positions? And the message I've received is we're not allowed to talk about the existing commitments. And I have a hard time digesting that. And so I will continue to bring it up.
Mr. Quince, just help me out with a little bit of factual information here. I don't have the task force document in front of me, unfortunately, but the projected income for this year, I think, is about almost 2 million above what that document projected. Am I correct in my memory of that, roughly? Just in round numbers.
Yeah, I think, God, I was just looking at it yesterday. I think we did these projections in 2019, I believe, and our projected amount for 21-22 was around 11 million. And so right now we're at 12.5 for 21-22. So it's,
Yeah, I thought it was about 10.8 versus 12.5. So, you know, 1.8 million above what the task force assumed.
yeah.
Obviously, with the anomaly of the COVID thing and the whole way it's restructured the economy, it's hard to project forward, but I take a little bit of comfort. I share Nicholas's concern, and my takeaway from this, or my suggestion for our thought process, is right now, the ongoing positions internal to the county, this is going to sound harsh, and I don't mean it to sound critical of anyone, but essentially do not get any scrutiny as to the cost benefit ratio that we apply to the rest of the applicants, where we take an explicit look at the cost benefit and so on. The reason I think I would like to see us move to a position where we're applying that same kind of standard to all of these applicants is not necessarily kind of draconian, but I think it's just practical in the sense that since former Sheriff Downey was involved in this process and so on, I have no doubt that the philosophy of the sheriff's office, and I'm just using it as an example because it's one that we're all kind of familiar with, but I think the philosophy of the sheriff's office and so on, you would find, and their approach and how they allocate their resources and so on, is probably fairly evolutionary in the sense that it's a result of things that they learn, educational process, changes in society, and obviously political pressure. So to assume just an automatic continuation, when in fact internally those departments may be looking at their area of service provision in a very different way, strikes me as a reasonable motivation to stop every year or two and look and say, okay, does this make sense given the context of where the society is, given the context of where the political reality is, and so on. So like I said, I don't do it in a manner, in my own mind at least, that's critical of those county agencies, but I recognize that the one service I'm familiar with, the fire service, has evolved substantially in the last 10 years. I've been retired for 12 years now, and the agencies are significantly different. The services they provide have evolved, and the community's expectation of them has also evolved. So I'm putting Sheriff Hansel to sleep, so I'm going to stop at this point.
Yeah.
Any other discussion that anyone would like to offer in regards to these topics? Ernie?
Yeah, I was trying to jump in behind Sean there when he was reminding us that this was a sales tax, general purpose tax, and the supervisors can spend it any way they want, that they don't have any responsibility to adhere to any issue. But what I'm more cognizant of and aware of than anything is the 4 points that this was sold to the voters on, and that was police, fire, ambulance, and roads. And those issues were hammered when the tax was put on the ballot and what this money was going to be spent for. And the supervisors made us a promise at the time that, yes, that's what they were going to focus on. That's what the tax was intended for. And I think it's the responsibility of the supervisors and the advisory committee to make sure that tax money is spent those 4 issues first, which is fire, police, ambulance, and roads. And I'm through.
Okay. Any other discussion or points? Ginger, go ahead.
I just want to get back to your comment, Glenn, about that the supervisors may go over to the other side and decide that they want us or somebody to make decisions on small grants. And I wanted to ask you, Sean, would that be considered like something that you were talking about? It becomes more of a specific tax instead of a general tax if they do that?
It's a good question. Looking at amounts rather than categories of things,
Mhm.
maybe there's a distinction there. It's something that we would probably have to discuss with county council, but I could see that being a distinction where we're talking about amounts rather than specific types of services.
Right. Well, and that would be different than our original committee. I mean, that's not something that we could do probably as a committee to make decisions about small grants. If they want to do that, it seems like that would be their responsibility. And we would be, we would be
Yeah,
doing our job and they can do theirs if they decide that's their job. So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, that would probably I would feel more comfortable with that coming as direction from the board, either them making the decision themselves or giving direction to this committee to make that determination.
Okay. Anybody else like to raise any points relative to the discussion that's gone forward? Scott? You're muted, Scott.
He's trying.
I'm banging on that space bar. Okay, is there anything in the ballot language that says that the advisory committee is responsible for the decision or the recommendation of 100% of the money? Or is there a way that the supervisors, like was said, could take a certain percentage for this microgrant process and determine who gets it themselves?
My memory, and I'm looking at it now, is there is no such language, no.
Okay, thank you.
It refers to audits and citizen oversight. And some people consider us the citizen oversight, but it doesn't explicitly address the point you're making. Nicholas?
Okay, all right.
In the ordinance, the full ordinance that I've read, and I believe I read an excerpt from it at a previous meeting, the only reference to oversight of the fund states that a citizens committee will be formed to oversee the funds generated from this tax.
Okay, so there's nothing specific that says 100% of the funds or any certain percentage.
The only thing I've seen just says to oversee the funds generated. It's very blanket statement, very ambiguous.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other points anyone like to raise? Any public comment on the discussion that we've had?
If you want to make a public comment and you're on the phone, go ahead and press *9 to raise your hand. If you're watching on your computer, there should be a little raise hand button at the bottom. Not seeing any hands raised, Chair.
Okay. Are you satisfied with the discussion, Nicholas, or any other points that you'd like to bring to the committee's attention?
I want to thank the committee for spending the time to do this with me.
Okay. Just by way of information and planning, the assumption would be that we would next meet sometime in early September when there would be a CAO's review essentially of activity and so on, and updates about activity and potentially activity of applicants and so on. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That'll be after the budget is adopted, so we can go over the final budget numbers. We can do an initial review of where the sales tax is heading this year. And we can talk about bringing some of the applicants in to talk about how they've progressed, and anything else that your committee wishes to do.
Okay. Ginger.
And I have a couple of things that I think should be on the application. Could we add that to our agenda for that meeting?
So review of the application process.
Yeah, I just have a couple of things that I think need to be on there.
Okay.
And Sean, do you think I could bring up the thing about training for advisors?
Yep.
So I think, it was kind of brought to my attention. I didn't realize, but when somebody becomes on the board of supervisors, they go away for a full week of training. And nobody on this committee has had any training when they come on. And Nicholas and I had about a 2-hour coffee one time because I realized when he was saying things that he felt bad that he was bringing things up, and I didn't think that was okay, for him to have to feel bad. And I've met with a couple other people that have been on the committee, and so I'd like to recommend to, I don't know, Sean, you, somebody, whoever makes decisions, that when somebody is appointed to this committee, that there's at least an hour or two of some kind of background history, where it came from, why we make decisions, just things that would be important, I think, for people to realize, because everybody comes on and they're all enthused and they feel like they want to make the big change, or they want us to, and there's things I would like to change too, but I realize I can't. So I just maybe think a board of supervisors person, maybe the person that appointed them, if it's one of the districts, somebody from the CAO's office, maybe Glenn or I, because we've been on the longest, like a history memory kind of thing, just so people, feel welcome, but also feel like they're a little bit more, educated about what we've done. It doesn't mean that they can't, change things, but at least they're not coming on with, not knowing. And then I know Justin Robbins said the same thing, because I called him after a couple meetings and said, can we talk? And we didn't talk about anything, with applicants, but just in general. So I would just like to recommend that we have some type of an overview introduction for anybody that comes on. And Tammy says that she probably doesn't need it since she's been to every single meeting, but it would still be nice, for her to have some kind of an introduction if we do start this. And then I have one thing that I think needs to be changed on the application or added that we can do in September. So that's all.
Ernie?
Yeah, I just want to say I was not looking forward to this meeting, that I was somewhat confused and thought maybe I had better things to do, but I probably got more out of this meeting today, and I think it put us more on the same page than anything we've done in the past. I really appreciate this meeting. I appreciate Nicholas for bringing us here, and I'm looking forward to him making a motion, whatever it was. That's all.
Okay.
Is it a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've concluded our business. There was no public comment. So Mr. Quincy, you think you have a clear understanding of the request for the agenda items in September?
I do. And committee members and chair, if there are, I'm available anytime. If you guys want to talk one-on-one, we can talk about things to include onto the agenda. I can walk you through some of the information that we have for this coming fiscal year, for things in the past. I'm, me and our staff here are available anytime to answer any questions that you guys have.
Okay, I would just have one request. When you schedule the Measure Z elements to go before the Board of Supervisors, would you be so kind as to notice each of the committee members of that, so that we have the capability to attend if we so desire, or if we have the capability to attend at that point?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your efforts and work. I certainly appreciate it, and we will look forward to seeing you all in September.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, the meeting is adjourned
Thank
at
you.
3:11.